The Senate will come to order. The Senate will come to order. Will members and guests please take their seats? We have a swearing in of the senator from the 1st Senate District, Caleb Frostman, elected to the special election on June 12th. The chair recognizes the senator from the 32nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am excited and pleased to be able to have this opportunity today to formally introduce and have our new member join us today in a ceremonial swearing in. Senator Caleb Frostman is serving in the state Senate representing the 1st Senate District. Senator Frostman serves Door and Kewaunee counties as well as parts of Manitowoc, Brown, Calumet, and Outagamie counties. Since being elected in June of 2018 special election, Senator Frostman has been hard at work championing economic development, environmental conservation, and preserving our great outdoor sporting heritage. Since he was elected in June, if Senator Frostman wasn't attending community events or working on behalf of his constituents, he could be found fishing or hunting, and I have seen the results of that in bear and deer and turkey. Senator Frostman was raised in Green Bay and currently lives in Sturgeon Bay. He is the former executive director of the Door County Economic Development Corporation, which under his leadership was a model economic development organization for the rest of the state. Every resident deserves to be represented, and Senator Frostman serves with integrity and professionalism. Despite claims that we didn't need this special election because legislation wouldn't be coming in, here we are here today. The people of the 1st Senate District deserve representation, and I couldn't be more proud to have Senator Frostman with us today. Thank you.
As President of the Senate, I have the pleasure of administering the oath of office to Senator Caleb Frostman, pursuant to Section 13.03 of the Wisconsin statutes. Will Senator Frostman please come before the bar? At this time, the chair would like to recognize the newly sworn-in senator from the 1st.
Sure. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words, and I'll keep it very brief, no more than 90 minutes. Just really appreciate the opportunity to serve the folks of the 1st Senate District and be part of this dignified body in the state of Wisconsin, and wish it was a little longer period, but look forward to working with you guys the next couple days. Thank you.
We're on the first order of business, the call of the roll. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Bewley, Carpenter, Coles, Craig, Darling, Erpenbach, Fine, Fitzgerald, Frostman, Hanson, Johnson, Kappenga, Larson, Lemieux, Markline, Miller, Moulton, Nass, Olson, Petrowski, Ringhan, Risser, Roth, Schachner, Schilling, Strobel, Taylor, Teston, Tiffany, Beinhout, Vukmir, Wangard, Wirch. All members are present.
There are 33 members present. A quorum is present. The Senate will remain standing. At this time, the Senate will stand. At this time, I'll invite the senator from the 22nd, Senator Moulton, 23rd, I'm sorry, Senator, to come up and lead us in an invocation.
Good afternoon, Senators. It's so good to be with you again. It's exciting times, and this is a day that the Lord has made, so let's rejoice and be glad in it. Let's pray. Almighty God, God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the great I am, God, I thank you for each senator that's here today. I pray for each one of us. You say in your word, God, that if we lack wisdom, that we should ask for wisdom. So I pray, God, for wisdom for each one of us, the wisdom of Solomon, Lord. And I pray for safety. I pray for each one of our families, that you protect and keep us safe. God, I just ask that you would bless this time. And also, Lord, I would just pray that each one of us, Lord, each senator, would also be filled with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And that the world would see that, Lord. We just ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
The Senate will remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance this afternoon, and opened by the senator from the 1st, Senator Frostman.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, good afternoon, Senators. I would like, just as we start, just to remind we've got a full gallery, and that is a wonderful thing. And I just want to remind our gallery and any guests who are on the outside of the Senate floor here to know that there are certain rules as we engage in debate here today. And those are found in Senate Rule 13M, which outlines the conduct of our guests in the galleries and seated on the outside of the floor. And to sum it up very quickly, it basically means that you must remain quiet at all times to engage and foster the debate that is going to happen on the floor. So any posting of signs, any verbal, both positive or negative outbursts, none of those will be tolerated here this afternoon. So with that, we are on the 7th order of business, advice and consent of the Senate, and I recognize the senator from the 13th.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to have the appointments considered in mass and that the chief clerk dispense with the reading of the appointments.
Without objection, there is objection. Yeah, I believe I said there was an objection. Senator from the 32nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise on a point of personal privilege relating to this unprecedented and reckless extraordinary session.
Please state your point of personal privilege.
I will continue with my point of personal privilege. What we are seeing is a blatant overreach of Republicans who are more interested in securing and increasing your legislative power. Republicans are defiant.
I would just, Senator from the 32nd, please withhold your remarks for a moment. That would be an example of a outburst. Again, that will not be accepted here today. We must stick to our Senate rules as they are outlined in Senate Rule 13M. At the entrance to the Senate chambers on both the first level and to the galleries is a list of what that expectation is. So please read that if you need a refresher. But again, refrain from any verbal outburst or applause of any kind. Senator from the 32nd, you may continue.
We are seeing our colleagues in the majority as defiant and desperate in the wake of a new Democratic governor and attorney general. Within a day of victory, Governor-elect Evers contacted Senate and Assembly Republican leaders, extending an olive branch with a sincerity to put the election in the rearview mirror and find common ground and get to work for the people of Wisconsin. And how did Republican leaders respond? with divisive, sweeping proposals to eliminate checks and balances and consolidate power from the executive and judicial branches into the legislative branch. The election itself was the people's checks and balances on our democracy. Exactly 4 weeks to the day, yes, election day was just 4 weeks ago today, but on December 4th, you want to override the will of the people, the will of the voters. On November 6th, Wisconsin residents made it clear that they are tired of the divisive divide and conquer tactics, and they want to see positive change. The stealing of power from Governor-elect Evers and Attorney General-elect Call now adds to the brokenness of this institution. 585 dairy farms have been shut down their operation this year. Wisconsin roads and bridges continue to deteriorate. Wisconsin schools grapple with state funding cuts. It is ridiculous that Republicans are more concerned with clinging to power than accepting an election. It is beyond the pale of responsible leadership and effectiveness of what is happening today. The Republican legacy will be that of corruption and shameless power grabs and the misplaced priorities that ignore issues facing Wisconsin families. Your antics today is what the voters rejected on November 6th. Today you cheat and you steal your way into the next session and administration and power triangles. Republicans need to stop putting politics and power over people and accept the election and incoming administration and work and listen and lead together with Democrats to solve the problems facing our state. Wisconsin, its citizens, this body, this institution, it deserves better than what you are going to deliver today. Today, what you are doing, it continues to break the foundation of civility, dignity, trust, working order, and Wisconsin and her citizens deserve better. But it is clear that you don't care. You don't care. You care about power, not about our democracy. And it is and will always be about the people.
The question is confirmation of Senator from the 16th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise on a matter of special privilege.
Senator from the 16th, special privilege is taken up in the 15th order of business, and we allow the majority leader and the minority leader from each party to make statements unrelated to the question that is before us. I would just ask that you withhold your remarks to the 15th order. Senator from the 27th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Inquiry of the chair.
Please state your inquiry.
You going to guarantee us we're going to get to the 15th order of business today?
I see no reason why we would not, Senator.
Is that
from the
a yes? Is that a no?
Senator from the 27th, I have no reason to believe we will not make it to the 15th order of business.
Okay. Further inquiry. Don't mean to tie things up. You said no. Reason to believe. Is that a yes then? I'm just trying, details.
Yes, Senator from the 27th, I do expect that we will make it to the 15th order of business. Thank you. So the question before us now, Senator from the 3rd.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have concern that we're taking up these appointments. I had sent a letter to the Senate Majority Leader's office and also to the Senate Chief Clerk's office. There are several people that are on this list that have received no public hearing whatsoever, and we're going to bring up their confirmation. That's a terrible precedent for us to take, and there are some very, very important appointments that are before us. And then also, the word is advice and consent of the Senate. My concern is I've not seen any statement of economic interest on any of these individuals, and I had requested that yesterday. So I don't feel comfortable, members of this body should not feel comfortable voting on appointments that are brought up at the last minute in a lame duck session with no public hearings, no statement of economic interests, but we're going to push these on. And these are important positions. We're talking about the Board of Regents, we're talking about tech colleges. You go through it, and it's not just a couple. There are a couple pages here of individuals who've had no public hearings. And so I'd like to raise a point of order, Mr. President, that the appointments are not properly before us, that we are required to have statements of economic interest before we vote on these appointments. And then second of all, I would like to have a ruling whether we are going to the new Senate policy of allowing people to be appointed to boards that have not received public hearings. Public hearings are important. When people come up, and I've served on various committees, I ask people, well, why do you think you want to be on the board? If you're on the board, what's your attendance? We've had a dysfunctional nurses board where there was a lot of infighting. And so when people came before the health committee, we were able to ask those questions. But today, because there's a power grab going on and things have to be done yesterday, we're taking up this whole list of appointments that are not properly before us. And so that's my point of order. I want to know where are my statements of economic interest and why are we having appointments that haven't been given public hearings?
Senator from the 3rd, pursuant to Senate Rule 22, subparent 1, whenever a nomination for an appointment is submitted to the Senate is required by law, the President shall refer the nomination to the Standing Committee. I've referred those to the Committee of Senate Organization. The committee then shall report its findings and recommendations to the Senate in writing. That has been, we have fulfilled that. The writing comes in the by both voting and publishing the calendar by the Committee of Senate Organization satisfies the rule in Senate Rule 22, subparent 1, so the appointments we have are properly before us. Senator from the 3rd.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like more information. It's nice that if you have a little small group of legislators that get together, but just as you want to cut out the public from this process and take away incoming duly elected officials, I've not seen anything. Did the Senate Org Committee have public hearings on these people that we're voting on? Did the Senate Org look through these statements of economic interest?
Senator from the 3rd.
The majority leader...
Senator from the 3rd. I believe you raised a point of order. I have ruled in that point of order that these nominations are properly before us. The question before the body now is the confirmation. Senator from... Senator from the 3rd, what is the statement about?
It's in the Senate Org report. You should read it.
No.
My unanimous consent is very simply, if we are voting on these appointments, I want to know from the Senate Majority Leader, where are the public hearings? When did the Senate Org have a public hearing on some of these members?
Okay, Senator from the 3rd, I appreciate your comments. You did raise a point of order. The presiding officer, which is myself, ruled on that point of order that these nominations are properly before us. So the question before the body now is the confirmation of Shirley A. Armstrong.
Mr. President, I was standing and asking unanimous consent. I did not hear anybody object to it.
Senator from the 3rd, you asked unanimous consent to what?
I asked unanimous consent to make a statement.
Senator from the 3rd, you made a statement.
I did not finish the statement because you interrupted me and you did not allow me to go ahead and find information about public hearings for these members and statements of economic...
Senator from the 3rd, when I'm talking, I would appreciate if I'm going to give you the opportunity, but I appreciate when I'm speaking that you just withhold your remarks to allow me to speak. Now, the Senator from the 3rd is asking unanimous consent to make a statement, which happens under the 15th order of business. Is there objection to the Senator from the 15th making a statement at this time? Without hearing an objection, Senator from the 3rd.
First of all, Mr. President, I think you're wrong. I think you can stand up and ask unanimous consent to make a statement at any time. So you're wrong on that, Mr. President. But to get on to the question, I asked the senator, the majority leader, where are the public hearings in Senate org on these appointments that the public
Senator
is
from
not...
the third, are you asking if the senator from the 13th will yield for a question?
If you would stop interrupting me, Mr. President, that's what I was asking.
I'm just going to remind, please withhold your remarks, Senator from the third. I'm just going to remind the gallery for a second time that verbal outbursts of any kind will not be tolerated. That is a second warning. And the third time that I hear something from the gallery other than silence, I'm going to ask the Senate Sergeant at Arms to clear the gallery, just so that we're clear on that point. Now, Senator from the third, are you asking would you like me to ask the senator from the 13th if he yields to a question?
How about if you let me finish speaking so that if you stop interrupting me, I'd like to be able to go ahead. I've been given unanimous consent to make a statement, and I would appreciate it if you would allow me to speak without interrupting.
Senator from the third, Senator from the third, I appreciate that, and I hope you understand that I have a job to do as well. Senator from the third, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I hope you don't run this body like the Finance Committee when the chairman, Representative Nygren, told people this is not two-way communication. And this is what's happening in this body. An elected official, a state senator, is standing up and asking a question. Two-way communication. I want to know, before we vote on these appointments, where were the public hearings? When were they held? I want to see the proceedings of the record and also how the vote came out from those committees. Second of all, I have not seen the statement of economic interests. I had asked for them. I had sent them, Mr. President, to the majority leader's office. He can ignore them if they want. It's a public record. But I think I have a right, and everybody in the state of Wisconsin has a right to ask, because we are given the advice and consent of the Senate, but you or the majority leader are refusing to require these people to show up for a public hearing and then find out if they have any economic conflicts. And so now I would like to ask if the senator from the majority leader would answer my question of where are the proceedings of the public hearing on some of these appointments, and where are the statements of economic interest? I have not seen them. I requested them yesterday. Thank you,
Senator from the 13th, do you yield for a question? The senator does not yield. Chair recognizes the senator from the 4th.
Mr. President, I'd like to ask the senator from the 3rd if he'd yield to a question.
Senator from the 3rd, will you yield? He does. Please state your question.
Senator from the 4th, what was it that you were going to ask the majority leader if he had yield to a question?
Senator from the 3rd.
I'm seeking the truth. I'm trying to find an answer of why Renee Anderson had no public hearing. Lisa Barr had no public hearing. Scott Brighto didn't have a public hearing. Dr. Matthew Briston didn't have a public hearing. Robert Burkett didn't have a hearing. Rosemary Dolotowski, it's a Polish name, I can pronounce that. Kelly Grebe didn't have a public hearing. Lisa Greco didn't have a public hearing. Bryce Hansen didn't have a public hearing. Stanley Jones didn't have a public hearing. Nayla Kalpit didn't have a public hearing. Dr. Herbert Michael Casti didn't have a public hearing. Stephen Klappich didn't have a public hearing. Thomas Kenso didn't have a public hearing. Joel Mankowski didn't have a public hearing. Dennis Myers didn't have a public hearing. Ellen Nowak, who she was appointed to the Department of Administration, and to my knowledge, we never voted on that. And now, without a public hearing, she's going to be appointed to the Public Service Commission, which is a big place. And the governor is circumventing the process by slipping someone in. Susan Perry didn't have a public hearing. Kim Rank didn't have a public hearing. John Renneman didn't have a public hearing. Timothy Schneidiger didn't have a public hearing. Dr. David Schleitling didn't have a hearing. Dr. Peter Shield didn't have a public hearing. Tim Short didn't have a public hearing. Pamela Stanwyck didn't have a public hearing. Dr. John Sterling didn't have a public hearing. Elena Taylor didn't have a hearing. Mark Thomas didn't have a public hearing. Tori Titeman didn't have a public hearing. John Whitecamp didn't have a public hearing. Dr. Catherine Zalewski didn't have a public hearing. Kate Zeisky didn't have a public hearing. And also Scott Zipperer didn't have a public hearing. So my concern is, Senator from the 4th, thank you for your question. I'm concerned because all of the people I mentioned have not had public hearings. And I have not yet been able to see, because they haven't had a public hearing, the committee didn't hear what they have to say, they didn't vote on approving them to move them forward, and then also, there's no statement of economic interests.
Why is that important?
Senator from, thank you, Senator from the 3rd. Senator from the 4th.
Why is the economic interest
Senator from the 3rd.
important?
Senator
Will
from-
you yield to a question?
Senator from the 3rd, do you yield for another question?
Yes,
he
I do.
does. Senator from the 4th, please state your question.
The statement of economic
Thank you.
interest is so important that each member of this body and anybody who runs for elective office in order to get on the ballot has to fill out a statement of economic interests to see if there are any conflicts of interest, which there have been many in some of these administrative positions in the Walker administration. You get to see specifically what property, what stocks they own, what partnerships they have, a lot of those things. And to be honest, some of the statement of economic interests are good to read over, because I think it can tell you a lot about the individual. So for us to vote on all of these individuals without public hearings, without knowing their economic background, something we all have to have, but this body is going to go ahead and vote for these appointments, and they're not just like till tomorrow. Some of these go until 2023. 24. So that's why I feel it's very important, and I feel very saddened that my good friend, the Senate Majority Leader, did not follow through on at least giving this body this information.
Senator, thank you.
One
Senator from
last
the 3rd.
question, Mr. President,
Senator
if
from
the
the-
senator from the 3rd would yield.
Senator from the 3rd, do you yield for an additional question?
Yes.
State your question. Senator from the 4th.
So the appointments and the economic interest report and the public hearing that you spoke about, are those the normal procedures that normally happen when individuals are not sore losers from the election?
Senate gallery will come to order.
Senator from the
Okay, I'm going to ask the Senate. I really do. I wish it didn't come to
That's
this.
inappropriate,
No,
Mr.
Senator from the 4th. I laid out the rules ahead of time to the gallery and to all of our guests here, and I'm going to ask the Senate Sergeant at Arms to clear the gallery, and the Senate will stand informal. The Senate stands recessed, subject to call of the chair.
Erpenbach. Fine. Fitzgerald. Frostman. Hanson. Johnson. Kappenga. Larson. Lemmyhugh. Markline.
The clerk will dispense with calling the roll. A quorum is present. So, Senator from the just a minute, Senator from the 30th. So, in the intervening time here, had some conversations with the minority leader, the senator from the 32nd, and we are going to reopen the gallery. And I just want you all to know that that's going to come with a certain amount of parameters. So we're going to reopen the gallery. The desire was there, and I think everyone understands that through this process we need the order and decorum. But we're going to open the gallery. If there is an outburst, we're going to remove the individual. If there is a second outburst, we're going to remove the individual and warn everyone that by the next outburst, we're going to clear the galleries again. If at any time in that process there's pandemonium and lots of shouting and so forth, at that time I will clear the galleries again. So with that understanding, we are on the 7th order of business, advice and consent of the Senate. I'm going to ask the clerk to read the first appointee.
Renee Anderson of Milwaukee is a public member on the Wisconsin Health and Educational Facilities Authority to serve for the term ending July 1, 2024.
The chair recognizes a senator from the 30th.
First of all, I didn't think we're taking up each individual appointment, but I had a question. I wanted to know if the senator from the 8th would yield to a question.
Does the senator from the 8th yield to a question? She does. Please state your question.
Okay, I have a real concern, the 2 appointments to the Board of Regents, and you as the chair of the Universities Committee and me as a member, to know that person never had a committee hearing, and I don't know if it's economic statement of interest, either of those 2 people. I just think those are appointments that should have stayed with the new governor, Tony Evers. For this to be planted in December to give these 2 individuals a spot on the Board of Regents is, again, a power grab. Yield to the question? My question is, do you think that's right?
Senator from the 8th.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are here today to vote on them for those 2 positions.
Senator from the 30th.
Point being, it is definitely a position that I would have that every appointment today should have waited till January 7th. What you're doing is taking power away. It's another power grab, and it is about the will of the people. They wanted Governor Evers to be able to do these things. When Governor Walker had all this power, you were fine. But now that it's this way and you think you've got all the power, even though in the assembly races, what was it? 54% Democratic, 46 Republican, and it's 36-63. You know how badly gerrymandered that was. But this is the governor's prerogative, really, that we should be allowing him to do these appointments. If Governor Walker would have been elected, none of this would be here. None of these appointments would be here. So why, with a new governor and a new attorney general, are we going there? To me, to quote somebody, it's shameful. It is a power grab, and you're ignoring the will of the people, and I think it's a huge mistake. Thank you.
The question is confirmation of Renee Anderson. Chair recognizes Senator from the 27th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Unanimous consent request to speak to all of the appointments.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thanks. As you know, Mr. President and members of the Senate, we have a process here in order for us to do our jobs. And I understand that sometimes that process is shortcutted a little bit. And sometimes we kind of skirt the edges on a few things. But there are some very basic things, that we never have fast-tracked, skirted the edges, kind of bent the rules a little bit. And that's when it comes to appointments and economic statements of interest. We have always had those. We have held up nominations in this body before for a number of different reasons. They were eventually confirmed, but senators, I remember from both sides of the aisle, have risen up and saying, so-and-so has not contacted me yet. I would like to have a meeting. And that nomination is held up until that meeting happens, and then everything moves forward. An economic statement of interest is a very, very basic thing that we have always had and we always should have. And with all due respect, Mr. President, we have reminded the guests that will be coming in that there are rules that the Senate follows and that we have. This is one of them. And if we're going to ask our guests to follow the rules, we absolutely should be following the rules. Now, as far as I know, it's just 2 appointments. Now, I understand the gravity of the appointments and what they're being appointed to. I get that. But it still does not usurp the very basics of paperwork that we need to have and need to see before we make a vote. We all sit in committees, and these wonderful people from all over Wisconsin volunteer to be on boards and commissions that I'm pretty sure a lot of us wouldn't. But they care very deeply about it, they're very passionate about it, and they make Wisconsin better because they're willing to give up their time. As they are testifying in front of us, and we ask them questions like, oh, wow, that's a long drive, how's the weather up there? You know, that kind of stuff. We're looking at their paperwork. We're looking at their statement of economic interest. We are seeing if there is any sort of conflict at all. And if there is, we find a very polite way to ask them about it. We've all looked at those things. There are 2 nominees that don't have those. And I would not be surprised is if they are confirmed today that they may not be able to hold that seat very long because they violated a basic rule here in the state Senate. And that is for us to see their statement of economic interest. If you're going to go forward with the rest of these, you are. Because there's paperwork along the way. I understand some of them are renominations, and that's great because they want to serve again. But there are 2. And they just happen to be on the Board of Regents that Scott Walker nominated last night, yesterday, day before. And they serve for quite a few years. And we don't know if there's any conflict. We don't know if they can actually even legally serve on the Board of Regents because they have not filed the paperwork that they are requested to file, that they have to file. So, Mr. President, you're asking us, not you personally, Senate Organization Committee is asking us to vote on something that is not properly before us. Not properly before us. So when those nominations come up, as well as a few others, there may be a request to send them back to committee. And it's not because we want to slow things down or take something away from Scott Walker as he's walking out the door. It's like his parting gifts. That's not what we're trying to do. They are just not properly before the Senate. It's not your fault, Mr. President. It's not the majority leader's fault. It's Governor Walker's fault for trying to grab 2 more things before it's like stealing towels in a hotel room. I mean, this and this and this. But what Governor Walker fails to recognize is regardless of who is in control in the state Senate, we have rules, we have procedures, we have decorum. And when the Republicans were in the minority, they called Democrats, when they were in the majority, on the rug quite a few times, and rightfully so, because certain things were not before us properly. So Democrats had to take a couple of steps back and go through the proper process to make sure that whether it was a nomination or a piece of legislation was properly before the Senate. So again, it's not that we want to stop Scott Walker. Well, yeah, we do. But that's not the point. The point is, if we're voting on something, it has to be here legitimately. And those 2 nominations are not. So I hope when time comes, we take a step back, we send those 2 names at least back to, I'm assuming, the Senate Committee on Organization. Speaking of which, can I ask the senator from the 32nd to yield to 1 question?
The senator from the 32nd yield to a question. She does. Please state your question.
Have you seen economic statements, economic interest statements from the 2 Board of Regent appointees? I have not. Thank you. That's my point. Those, when they come up, will not be here properly, and odds are, if somebody wants to make a big fuss out of it after they are confirmed, if they are, their tenure is going to be extremely short. I don't even think they're going to get their name on the letterhead. Thank you.
Just for a point of information for the body, so the galleries will be reopened, and you will see members of the public in onesie-twosies kind of filling the galleries. When the galleries are full, the senator from the 32nd has requested to make a statement. So when they are full, you will see me calling on her at that time to do that. Senator from the 25th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Unanimous consent to speak on all nominations.
Without objection, so
Thank
ordered.
you. First of all, I draw attention to the fact that we are going to be voting apparently person by person, and in some cases they will be requested to be sent back committee, and I'm sure that there are going to be conversations about each of them. But in total, we are being asked as a body, as senators, to represent our constituents and do our job fully. We took an oath to do that. And what we are being asked to do now is to follow through with that with a different process. A process that basically says, this is good enough, trust us. Well, in my opinion, to adequately serve my constituents, good enough, trust us, is not good enough for my constituents, and it's not good enough for the people of the state of Wisconsin. We do things the right way for a reason, because if you do them the right way, then justice is served, and at least the process is adequate to the task. If we don't follow the process, we are typically haunted by it later. Now, I have not seen statements of economic interest. I know nothing about these people. And even if someone would have given them to me last night, I would have said this is not adequate. I cannot do my job well. By going through this process now, we are being asked to shun due process and to dummy down our own responsibility to our constituents. Not only that, there are probably, most of these people are good people, and because of the absence of due process, I must vote no on every one of them, because these good people have not been able to demonstrate to this body that they are qualified, that they are good people. And so they are going to have a legitimate question of this Senate. Why did so many people vote against me? And it will be answered by the fact that you, nominee, were denied due process. You, nominee, were denied the opportunity to present yourself fully via a hearing, via the required documentation, and instead they dummied you down to substandard requirements that were good enough for you. Well, they're not good enough, in my belief, to these people. They're not good enough to my constituents, and they're not good enough for the state of Wisconsin. And yet you are willing to accept that as how you fulfill the duties of the office. I am shocked, deeply disappointed, and to each and every one that I am asked to vote, I must, with the absence of due process, vote no on some probably very well qualified and honorable people. Because of what is being done in this body today, you are denying them and the people due process.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 31st.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I had a brief, simple inquiry of the chair.
Please state your inquiry.
I wondered if session material was sent around to all the offices so that we could take a look at the economic interest statements before we came to the floor today. If it was, I think I missed it.
Senator from the 31st, The answer to your question is no, they are, those nominations are in the Committee on Senate Organization. That's where they exist right now.
So the economic interest statements that we're all anxious to see, why aren't they before us?
Senator from the 31st, we will look into that and I will get back to you if that's okay.
Yes, and I have one other bit of information I thought would be good for me to share with the body. We heard from the senator from the 27th that he thought that this was a violation of process. But I've just now learned from the Wisconsin Legislative Reference Bureau that it's not only a violation of process, it's a violation of state law. And the particular statute is Chapter 19, Section 42, parens 10, parens D, which says that the Board of Regents members are required to file an economic interest statement. And I think it's important, Mr. President, that we understand that not only does it appear to be that we're looking at violating process, we're also violating the law.
Senate,
the statute is statute 19.42, parens 10, parens D. The Board of Regents members are required to file an economic interest statement.
Question is confirmation of Renee Anderson. Chair recognizes Senator from the 7th.
Thank you, Mr. President. As we're tiptoeing around to make sure we're not breaking the law as we move forward in a rush here, I just want to state that if we are, that I also intend to vote against all of these appointments because we have not had their economic interest forms, because we have not had the public hearing, and we are abdicating our duty as state senators to advise and consent. And so if we are advising and consenting, I guess my advice to the governor would be let's actually give us the time to vet some of these appointments. And while I'm offering free advice, I'll give some advice to the Senate. Why not use the power we have before we're eagerly grabbing more power for the body later today? This is something that's in our realm. This is what we're supposed to do, is move these through, vet them, make sure they're good, make sure they're going to serve the people, serve the interests of the individual boards that they're going to be on. That's our job. That's what we're supposed to do as state senators. So let's do it. Whereas later today, a lot of other things that are not our job and not our role, in a conflict and a violation of the checks and balances that our state have been under, before we're grabbing those, why don't we do the job that we have already? So I think it's, I wanted to make sure that my vote was explained, Mr. President. I appreciate the chance to do that. Further, I would say I think there is no clearer example of the dichotomy between how we are treating the appointments today and how we are treating the bills. The party in power is giving due deference and not questioning or looking into any of these appointments. But at the same time, a governor who was duly elected and has not set foot and has not taken the oath of office, we're already saying we don't trust you and we're going to step in and prevent you from being able to do your job. It shows the naked partisanship that exists in this session today, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 32nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I observe, we've got the members of the public have returned to our galleries to join us here in the State Senate. And I want to ask that you please recognize and observe our rules and our order. And I know it is going to be difficult. Democracy is messy. Today, we are all up here right now on our frustrations and on our desires for a new day and a new administration on the horizon. And yet, we have 4 more weeks of the current administration. And we do have order, we do have rules, we do have the decorum, and we need to follow these procedures. And we want you here. We want you here to observe democracy and to listen to the speeches. And I know that I want to speak on behalf of the minority party, but also with our Senate body president about the need to respect this body and this process. And I know it's going to be difficult. I've been here a long time. We can do this the right way. It can be a long day, and I just please ask for your indulgence because I want you up there. I want you to participate. And this is going to be tough. I got to take a deep breath. I got to pause, act, react as the leader. And I hope that you will respect the rules and the decorum in observing the Senate today. Thank you.
Question is confirmation of Renee E. Anderson. Chair recognizes Senator from the 3rd.
Inquiry of the chair.
Please state your inquiry.
Could you, I'd like to inquire which you would prefer to have, either to have unanimous consent that the stated rule is the senator from the 31st had stated about the statutes that we would be violating, to either have that entered, unanimous consent that be entered into the Senate record, or if you would prefer to have a point of order raised so that we know exactly what was brought before the body for legislative intent.
Senator from the 3rd, I guess that's entirely, if you want to ask unanimous consent that be entered into the record, I would entertain that motion.
Yes, unanimous consent that information about the violation of statutes be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered. The question is confirmation of Renee E. Anderson. Chair recognizes Senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President and members, I rise and ask for unanimous consent to be able to speak to all
Without objection,
the appointments
so ordered.
without objection. Thank you so much, Mr. President. I think the first thing that I too want to speak to is the fact that we watched the people who own this house be put out. And we watched them be put out because, Mr. President, you said that there was process and that process had been violated. You said not one, not two, but 3 times, and as a result, you cleared out the whole gallery. Well, we're saying there's process for appointments. And the process for appointments is that anybody can apply, but there's some specific documents that we need to get. And when we get those documents, we're able to look through those documents, ask questions, and we do that in a hearing. And those hearings are in committee. And what we basically have experienced here, Mr. President, is that we not only have been denied the documents because we got a dump on Friday at 5 to 5. And you know all agencies were closed when you dumped, so we weren't able to get information from them. It was asked that the information be provided to our office. Monday didn't happen. Tuesday didn't happen. We're on the floor and we still don't have it. So we aren't following process, meaning we, meaning you, y'all, the outer ring. And I'm just saying, when do you hold yourselves accountable for process and holding yourself accountable to the process? So I'm a little concerned because when I look at the fact that you have 81 appointments that have been provided late night on Friday that we have no information on, and you want us to appoint these 2 positions that will end in July of 2019, but July of 2020, and July of 2021, and May of 2023. And the one that made me, almost fall down and hit my head is July of 2024. So let's put that in context. You want to appoint someone after the election and the people have spoken to a position, in particular, this is the WEFA board, which I learned about does a lot with bonding, millions of dollars. And you want to appoint Renee Anderson to the board, and she will be there to 2024. Now, when will what year? We're in 18 now, so 4 years from now. So 4 years from now, his whole term, you want to appoint someone that will be in for the whole term of the governor. You're denying the governor's ability to appoint. And I find it not only troubling and maybe even morally corrupt, I find it very hypocritical, and let me tell you why. Mr. President, I was reading this letter from November 10th of 2010. It reads, "Dear Secretary Shuf, I'm looking forward to a smooth and orderly transition from the Governor Doyle's administration to mine. Since Election Day, I have appreciated the governor's and your gracious cooperation and the cooperation of your staff as I have established my transition office. As I prepare to govern, I respectfully ask that the Doyle administration consider the following request." And I'm going to do a summary of these. There are 5. One was the federal health care implementation. Ironically, in the last sentence of that paragraph, the governor says, "I ask that the Doyle administration temporarily freeze any new implementations of the federal health care law, including the establishment of exchanges until January 3rd. The second one is state employee contracts. You remember the contracts with AFSCME? You weren't here, but some of the people in the outside ring were. And they were contracts for the time that the governor, elect at that time, Walker, was not here for, 2009 to 11. And he asked that those contracts, that he be allowed to negotiate them and stop. He said permanent hires. Well, there's no reason for the administration to finalize any permanent civil service personnel decisions because for the final last 2 months of the administration. In the past, it has been common practice for political appointees to use this time to dump down into permanent civil service positions, and I believe these appointees should be required to go through the same application process as any other civil servant. And my administration will review my new permanent hires. The fourth area is about charter street power plants. And then the fifth area is about administrative rules. And in the fourth one, he says, I ask that the Doyle administration begin making plans to shift to natural gas rather than biofuel at the Charter Street power plant. In the fifth area of administrative rules, he says that I ask that your administration delay the promulgation of any new or updated administrative rules until after January 3rd. Then he goes on to say there are a variety of other items that my transition team will be in communication with Governor Doyle. You and your staff, I am confident we can find common ground on the 5 requests and continue to work towards an orderly transition. In case the hypocrisy does not stand out to you, the fact that the governor has said he's willing to sign things that do the exact thing against what he said in 2010 is shameful. More shameful is, oh my goodness, I just hate that the majority leader is not here because I want to read him his words because I think these are really interesting. Senator Fitzgerald said, for the Democrats in 2012, this is what he said, January 24th. He says, for the Democrats, the state of our state won't even be good enough unless they're in the driver's seat. Interesting, outer ring. Seems like it makes some of you laugh because you're like, oh, yeah, that is. We kind of doing some really outrageous things in order to be in the driver's seat because you don't like the voice of the people. You're willing to, Mr. President, not use the process for appointments, deviate from the very arguments. I mean, I know there's a good journalist out there that can go and find the words of the individuals that were in the outer ring saying why appointments shouldn't happen, why the Doyle administration should halt on what they're doing. I thought this was really, really, really interesting to hear from Speaker Voss in August of 2011. Instead of having the opportunity for us to see the full impact of whether or not the changes were good or for Wisconsin or bad for Wisconsin, they became a political topic almost immediately, and that's bad for democracy. Changing the process for recall petitions in 2011 in the defense of democracy, that's what Voss said. So I say that, to say not one appointment, not two, but 5 pages of appointments, 81 appointments from A to Z, literally, completely is a stripping of power of the governor. It's the Republicans saying you want to stay in the driver's seat, even though you have lost both the AG and the gubernatorial seat. Don't you all have children? Didn't you teach them to be good sports and follow the rules? Mr. President, it is unacceptable to ask us to vote on individuals that we have not had a proper hearing on, we do not have the proper documents, and more importantly, when the people have said that the individual who should lead is Governor-elect Tony Evers. To do what you are doing is a sad, sad, shameful state, and you should not do these appointments. I will be voting no.
The question is confirmation of Renee E. Anderson. The chair recognizes the senator from the 3rd.
Thank you, Mr. President. After talking with some senior colleagues who have more gray hair than I do, I would like to withdraw my request that we vote on the appointments individually.
The senator from the 3rd removes his objection. The question is confirmation. The chair recognizes the senator from the 27th.
Were you going to take him up en masse?
That is correct.
Okay. Unanimous. Well, okay then. Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. President. I just want to point out a couple of things before we vote on 2 particular nominees. Did a little more research, and this is not their fault. We're talking about the 2 appointed to the Board of Regents. It's not their fault for being picked, I guess, last night and being up on the floor today or whenever they were. But just so we're clear, Mr. President and colleagues of the State Senate, if they go forward and the paperwork isn't filed properly, it's up to $5,000 in a civil forfeiture, which, with GoFundMe now, I guess you could raise that. But if they did it knowingly, it's a misdemeanor. $5,000 and possible jail time, which we all know is not going to happen. But that stuff's hanging out there. And again, it's not their fault. This is Governor Walker's fault for picking a couple of people, throwing them into the State Senate without helping them with due diligence of what they're supposed to be doing. So I guess with that, Mr. President, I would like to take the appointments for their own sake, of Scott, I believe it's Big Tall, and Tori Tiedemann, and refer them back to the Senate Committee on Organization.
The senator from the 27th moves that. Senator from the 27th, did you move or ask unanimous consent? Does it matter? Move. Senator from the 27th moves that the nominations of Scott Bytall and Tori Tiedemann be re-referred to the Senate Committee on. Those opposed, no. Senator from the 27th, did you have something before I?
With all due respect to the senator behind me, this is kind of a serious thing here. And we're supposed to be serious people, for the most part. We are putting 2 nominees in a pretty peculiar situation here. Their paperwork isn't filed. We haven't been able to look at it. We don't know what's in there. I'm sure nothing is wrong with either one of them, and I'm sure there's nothing wrong with their paperwork if we had an opportunity to see it. Just to be clear and on the record, Mr. President, when the senators who vote in favor of this, there could be a civil forfeiture involved, there could be misdemeanor involved, although the misdemeanor is highly unlikely. We are putting them in a very precarious situation because, again, Scott Walker's grabbing anything he possibly can on his way out the door. And we, being the more deliberative body, with most of us returning back here in January, we have a responsibility and an obligation to the state of Wisconsin and the Board of Regents to make sure that those who are there on the board are there properly, without question, because the Wisconsin State Senate did its due diligence. So I would hope that we vote in favor of returning them to the Senate Committee on Organization.
The question is referring the nominations of appointments, rather, of Scott Breithall and Tori Tiedemann to the Senate Committee on Organization. All those in favor of re-referring to the Senate Committee on Organization will vote aye. Those opposed, no. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Bewley. Carpenter. Coles. Craig. Darling. Erpenbach. Fine. Fitzgerald. Frostman. Hanson. Johnson. Keppinga. Larson. Lemieux. Markline. Miller. Moulton. Nass. Olson. Petrowski. Ringhan. Risser. Roth. Schachner. Schilling. Strobel. Taylor. Teston. Tiffany. Feinhaut. Vukmir. Wangard. Wirch. Darling. Fine. Larson. Markline. Olson. All members have voted in the negative, with the exception of Senators Bewley, Carpenter, Erpenbach, Frostman, Hanson, Johnson, Miller, Ringhan, Risser, Schachner, Schilling, Taylor, Weinhaut, and Wirch.
There are 14 ayes, 18 noes. The appointments are not referred. The question is confirmations of the appointment in Mass. A roll call is required. All those in favor of confirmation say aye as your name is called. Those opposed, no. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Bewley. Carpenter. Coles. Craig. Darling. Erpenbach. Fine. Fitzgerald. Frostman. Hanson. Johnson. Keppinga. Larson. Lemieux. Markline. Miller. Moulton. Nass. Olson. Petrowski. Ringhan. Risser. Roth. Schachner. Schilling. Strobel. Taylor. Teston. Tiffany. Weinhaut. Vukmir. Wangard. Wirch. Larson. All members have voted in the affirmative, with the exception of Senators Bewley, Carpenter, Erpenbach, Frostman, Hanson, Johnson, Larson, Miller, Petrowski, Ringhan, Risser, Schachner, Schilling, Taylor, Weinhaut, and Wirch.
Senator from the 29th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Asking unanimous consent to change my vote to aye.
Senator from the 29th wishes to be recorded as an aye. There are 18 ayes, 15 noes. The appointments are affirmed. We are now on the Senator from the 7th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent to have the roll call previous to the one just called, that I be voting with the minority.
The Senator from the 7th asks unanimous consent on the re-referral question to be recorded with the minority without objection. So ordered. We are on the 10th order of business, joint resolutions. Chair recognizes the Senator from the 13th.
Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that Senate Joint Resolution 118 be brought up at this time.
Without objection, so ordered. The clerk will read the resolution.
Senate Joint Resolution 118 relating to honoring the life and public service of President George H.W. Bush. Whereas President George H.W. Bush was born on June 12, 1924, and whereas at the age of 18, Bush joined the U.S. Naval Reserve in the midst of World War II and served as a bomber pilot during that time, and whereas following his military service, Bush went on to attend Yale University, graduating in 1948, and whereas after working in the private oil sector, Bush went on to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives, and whereas Bush was later bestowed the honor of serving as the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, advancing ideals of peace and prosperity around the world, and whereas in 1976, Bush served as the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and whereas in 1980, Bush was elected to serve as Vice President of the United States with President Ronald Reagan, and whereas Bush's distinguished service to our nation culminated in 1989 as he was elected the 41st President of the United States, and whereas President Bush's ceaseless activism and dedication to family will lead as an American example for generations to come. Now therefore be it resolved by the Senate Assembly concurring that the Wisconsin Legislature honors the life and public service of President George H.W. Bush and extends its condolences to his family, friends, and the nation.
The question is adoption of Senate Joint Resolution 118. All those in favor of adoption, Chair recognizes the Senator from the 4th.
President, I wanted to take a moment to speak on the resolution.
The Senator from the 4th has the floor.
Mr. President, one of the things that you said in the resolution, is that the senior Bush was not only a family man, but a man of faith, but he also was a man that worked across the aisle. And so I'm going to say to all of you that it is somewhat sad to see that you're doing what you're doing as you also try to take time to recognize him, because I personally believe that the actions that you're doing are extreme.
Although Chair recognizes Senator from the 30th.
We just had a sheet here. It was pretty interesting. Person writes, I'm concerned citizen, a member of the Wisconsin legal community. And only a month ago, we had an election in which the people came out and voted and elected new leaders. Those votes ought to be respected. For you in a lame duck concession to try to make what the will of the people elected is blatantly undemocratic. But this is the part about the President George Herbert Walker Bush. He lost the U.S. presidential election in 1992, and he wrote William Jefferson Clinton, the new president, and said, I am rooting hard for you, and told him that his successes would be the country's successes. True words of wisdom about balance and power by a former president. But he got it. He understood. Transition must be fair. And for him to write that after a tough race, to say, let's get on with it, let's work together, let's find compromise. It's all about that. Thank you.
Question is adoption of Senate Joint Resolution 118. All those in favor of adoption will rise for a moment of silence. The resolution is adopted. We are on the 11th order of business, second reading of and amendments of Senate Joint Resolutions and Senate bills. The Chair recognizes the Senator from the 13th.
Mr. President, I would move that Senate Bill 883 be brought up at this time. I ask unanimous consent.
Senator from the 13th asks unanimous consent that Senate Bill 883 be, there is an objection. Is Senator from the 13th?
Mr. President, I would then move that Senate Bill 883 be brought up at this time.
Senator from the 13th moves that Senate Bill 883 be taken from the Committee on Senate Organization and taken up at this time. A roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll. Oh, Senator from the 3rd?
I'm sorry, but could the chief clerk tell me what the bill is? I have no idea.
The clerk will read the title of the bill.
Senate Bill 883 relates to state and local highway projects, expenditures of transportation monies received from the federal government, determining a reduction in individual income tax rates, and election of pass-through entities to be taxed at the entity level.
The So the question before us, there's a motion to take Senate Bill 883 from the Senate Committee on Organization and take it up at this time. The clerk will call the roll. All those in Senator from the 16th, rather.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. These bills have just so recently become available, is that I want to make sure that we know what we're voting on is
Senator from the 16th.
what is the LRB number on the bill that we're considering?
Senator from the 16th, if you just hold 1 second. 6075.
6075/1.
That is correct. Senator from the 13th.
We recess, just stand in recess until the bill is distributed to all the members? I don't know.
The Senate will stand informal as the clerks distribute the bill.
Here it comes.